Welcome everyone to another QS video, and I'm honored to be here today with Dr. Rita Colwell. She served as the 11th director of the National Science Foundation in the United States from 1998 to 2004. She was awarded a BS in bacteriology and an MS in genetics from Purdue University, and a PhD in oceanography from the University of Washington in 1961. And since then, she's held numerous positions as a professor. She's been a researcher with over 100 publications. She's written several books, and she's served as government and advisory boards, most notably in the National Science Foundation, but she's also been the president of the American Society for Microbiology, the International Union of Microbiological Sciences, the president of the Washington Academy of Sciences, the president of the American Association for the Advancement of Science, and a myriad of other important scientific institutions. Furthermore, she's been awarded several prizes, including the 2010 Stockholm Water Prize, the 2006 National Medal of Science, and the Sun.
That's the Rising Sun.
The Rising Sun, yes, thank you, from Japan. So with this incredible curriculum and scientific career that you have created for yourself, I would like to start asking you about the very beginning. So as a high school student, you were told that women couldn't pursue a career in science. And despite this, you persisted. And as I mentioned, you hold degrees in several areas that are not entirely related to each other, like bacteriology, genetics, and oceanography. And you have also written a book called A Lab of One's Own, right? A wink to Virginia Woolf, that discusses your experience as a female in science. So first of all, what motivations did you have to pursue science at that age? And did you have any role models that you looked up to?
Well, I was always interested in science. I grew up in a little town just north of Boston, right near the lighthouse in Beverly Cove, opposite Salem, Massachusetts. And so I spent a lot of time wandering the beach and climbing the rocks with my dog and investigating the tide pools and so forth. So I always had an interest in science. And then my older sister married a physicist who came to the house when they were first courting, I guess is the term you would use. And I got to talk with him and his colleagues who came to visit as well. The discussions were very fascinating. I wasn't sure I wanted to study physics, but I thought chemistry would be very interesting. Mm-hmm. So that's how I pursued science. But the chemistry professor the teacher at the high school made it very clear when I asked him for a letter of recommendation to college that girls don't do chemistry. Mm-hmm. So he would write a recommendation. I found out later, years later, with someone from Beverly High School, where I went for high school, that he had said that to other people, other girls. So it was just really blocked. It wasn't a personal thing. It was just an attitude at the time. Mm-hmm. So that's how I was really interested in science.
So at the time, did you have any role models, or were you more or less pursuing it because you were interested personally? But
it seemed like a career that had a lot of potential possibilities for traveling and seeing the world and understanding how the world works. I applied to Radcliffe and Smith and some other colleges, which is what most girls did in those days. This was, 60 years ago. Mm-hmm. I was accepted at Radcliffe, but I would have to commute, which meant climbing on the Boston and Maine Railroad, which we in those days called the Broken and Mended, because it was constantly broken and needed to be mended. That would have been an hour, and then I would have had to take a bus or the subway to Cambridge. I wouldn't have been able to live on campus. My sister married the physicist, Hans Fredericks. He was a Dutchman who was on a Fulbright. She had met while she was teaching in the Midwest. And so she suggested that I apply to Purdue University. Purdue very nicely gave me a complete scholarship, paid for everything, which meant I could go to college, be a college student, live on campus, and to be able to afford to do a 4-year study. So I went to Purdue and never looked back.
So moving on a bit further, fast forwarding, as the National Science Foundation Director, you created Advance, which is a program to support and encourage female scientists, I imagine mostly guided by your own experience. And what did this program encompass exactly, and how did you convince others about its importance for the future of science at the time that you founded it?
I worked on Advance with my deputy director, Joseph Verdonia. He was a wonderful man. He had been dean of engineering at the University of Pennsylvania, and a very good dean, and very, very attuned to diversity and inclusion. In fact, he was responsible for assisting a couple of women to become deans of engineering, which at that time, 22 years ago, was essentially unheard of. Well, I shouldn't say unheard of, it was rare. So Joe and I knew we had to work on diversity in the sciences and engineering because it was so low, so few women. And we knew also that Congress, some members of Congress, would not be very supportive, and they would knock down anything we did that would be particularly dramatic. So we focused on getting women into science, engineering, and medicine and mathematics. And we focused on providing funding to universities that would have programs encouraging women in science. And so we converted it entirely to that kind of a program, and I supported it very, very strenuously in Congress. And they celebrated their 20th anniversary a couple of years ago.
Oh,
so the program has resulted in about 9,000 women being introduced to careers of science, engineering, medicine, mathematics through this program, faculty members. So these are women who are professors in universities across the country. So it turned out to be really very successful and continues to be.
In terms of female leadership in science, do you think there's still room for improvement? Because I was thinking back, well, so far, my experience as a student, I've actually had more female chemistry teachers and professors than I have had male chemistry teachers or professors, which I think is maybe unusual, but are we starting to see some kind of turn or improvement in how women are present in science, do you think?
Well, there's an improvement, but what you have to look at are the statistics at the lecturer, assistant professor level. There's a kind of equality. Then for promotion to associate professor, you'll find much fewer women actually are promoted. And then when you look at full professor, it's even less. In fact, in the computer sciences, only about 20% are PhDs in computer science are women. And in physics, it's something like 18 or 20%, and engineering is still even worse, something in the order of 15%. So women end up, as usual, doing the work at the lower level, but they don't get recognized and promoted, and they don't become deans or department chairmen as proportion to what we represent in the society. Women are roughly about 52%. The reason for the slightly greater is that women seem to be hardier and survive childhood a few percent more than boys do. So we're really stronger. And we should be represented at least by 50%, but that we have not yet achieved.
Well, lastly, I just wanted to turn again to the numerous prizes that you've received, most notably possibly the National Medal of Science here in the US. What was it like to have your work finally recognized after so many years in the field? And what were your feelings when you got notified of these prizes?
I think the one that was most touching was the Stockholm Water Prize, which I received from the King of Sweden. And that was recognition because as a scientist, I had made some breakthroughs in understanding cholera, this terrible disease that we're in a cholera pandemic right now. It's the sixth pandemic that started in the early 1960s, the seventh pandemic, which started in the 1960s. But of course, the COVID pandemic overshines anything else. But it was very controversial because 40 years ago, being a woman scientist was a lot harder than it is now. And the discoveries that I made were not acknowledged. In fact, I was even told that it wasn't important because if it had been, a man would have made the discovery. So I'm not making it up. So it was really nice to be recognized for my work on cholera by the Stockholm Water Prize. But I have to tell you, my greatest, most wonderful reward of all is I have two daughters who are terrific. One is a physician who practices medicine in Canada, in Nova Scotia. She's a pediatrician who focuses on autism and developmental diseases and considerations of children. And my other daughter is a botanist, and she's become a specialist in California wildflowers and native plants. And she is now at the University of California, Davis, running the diversity center and is curator of the herbarium. So I'm very proud of my two scientist daughters. Of course, the poor girls didn't have much choice for the physicist father and a microbiologist mother. But they're wonderful, and I have three grandchildren, and my granddaughter. I have two grandsons and a granddaughter. And my granddaughter has just enrolled. She's in her first year at Smith College studying neuroscience.
That's beautiful. Yeah, I can imagine the family is more rewarding than any kind of prize, absolutely. And especially if they have such an amazing role model whose footsteps they can follow.
Well, I think at one point they were annoyed that I wasn't home baking chocolate chip cookies, but I think they've gotten over that.
Well, thank you so much for sharing all of these advices and your life stories. It's been wonderful to hear, and thank you so much for agreeing to this interview, and just keep on being such an amazing researcher, scientist, and a female advocate for future female scientists.
Thank you, Lily, and thank you for inviting me. It's been a pleasure talking with you, and I hope that you and your colleagues will pursue a career in science, engineering, mathematics, or medicine. Good luck.
Thank you.
Thank you.